Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to the information session on implementing Global Fund's quality assurance requirements for health products. You can listen to this webinar in English, French, and Spanish. Please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen to select the language. Supporting slides in French and Spanish will also be shared in a chat momentarily. We invite all attendees to enter their questions in the chat during the session. We will collect those questions and project them during the Q&A. Please note that the session will be recorded. By joining this session's participant consent to sharing their personal data, particularly how your username displays on Zoom. The final presentation and recording in English, French, and Spanish will be made available on the Global Fund website soon. We will also share the link you can use to access these resources in the chat. Please contact us at the Global Fund operations@theglobalfund.org if you have any questions. This address will also be pasted in the chat for you to use. So if we go to the next slide, please. So the objective of this session is to present the quality assurance requirements applicable to health products procured with the Global Fund's funds. We will have 11 sections as indicated in the slide, and we will then have time for a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I will now hand over to Alain Prat, Manager, Quality Assurance Policy and Governance in the Quality Assurance and Compliance team, who will go into our first section. Thank you, and over to you, Alain.
Good morning, everybody, and warm welcome to this training. My role would be to present briefly some background information on this, and in order to familiarize you to the different QA requirements that we will have and the different dimensions that we use to present this requirement. Next slide, please. So the first dimension is related to the product dimension. And as you can see, we have a broad range of products that our QA requirements are covering. Pharmaceuticals, I think we have all policies on pharmaceutical, diagnostics products, medical device, and here we have different type of medical device. And historically, we procure a lot of condoms and lubricant. And what you can see also is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we had to put some QA requirement on medical mask and PPE. We are also covering the vector control products. Next slide. Another dimension that we usually use to present our requirement is the product life cycle, where, as you may know, the beginning is the design and the development of the products, the manufacturing, registration by national authority, selection, then procurement, storage and distribution, dispensation and use, pharmacovigilance, market surveillance, and maintenance for the equipment, or end of life for also some of the products. So for all these different dimensions, we have also set up a requirement. What is highlighted in this particular slide is the reasoning behind the different QA requirement that we have put depending on the product's life cycle. And no need to go in the deep details, but all this is quite easy to understand. Of course, if the product is not adequately designed, then the quality per se and of the products will not be assured. If the manufacturer is not manufacturing as per good manufacturing practice, then it can challenge the products. If there is no adequate storage, then the initial quality of the products will be impacted. And lack of pharmacovigilance may lead to uncaptured safety events that will not be reported and may not lead to safety measure. Next slide. This is to record some, I would say, risk scenario that we face in the last years with the quality assurance product, and acting as example of QA issue that we had to solve, and also just recalling that all this can happen for different product category at different step of the processes. For example, for the dolutegravir case, it was a matter of pharmac safety signals to try to capture. So weak pharmacovigilance in this case needs to be supported. We had some case of fraudulent activities, rebranding HIV, and storage of condoms that just recall the importance of the implementation of the quality assurance principle. Next slide, please. This part is just to bring you within the quality assurance ecosystem and try to give you some light on the complexity of our environment. Next slide. So here you can see what are the different actors that we have identified. And to be honest, each time when I present this slide, I have comments on missing link between the different actors. So I don't pretend to be fully exhaustive, just to explain that, yes, the supply operation QA team in which place we are is completely within the complexity of institution environment, the suppliers, of course, the regulators, the procurers, and then the country, from the countryside, the national procurement entity and the supply chain distribution until the patient, and the national regulatory authority, the national disease program. All this means that there is a need for a lot of communication and good communication. And this also explains sometimes the complexity and of the process that we are implementing, and that can also justify some need for sometimes for improvement. You can see the different flow of information highlighted and the flow of the products that are highlighted in different way. Next slide, please. Here, just to recall that there is not only one procurement channel, and depending on the country situation, the channel for procurement can vary. I will not go into the details, but I think this is important to consider. All these procurement channel and all these institutions, beginning by our PSA working for the PPM, have to implement the quality assurance QA requirement, which are put in our policy. They have different, I would say, entities, but all are to satisfy these requirements from the, let's say, the centralized mechanism, the mechanism implemented by UN agencies, and we have put here some name of institution, GDF for TB products, UNICEF, mostly for ITNs, and of course the national procurement mechanism, depending on the country situation. Next slide, please. So what is, I would say, at the core of our QA requirement is the implementation of the reliance mechanism and the reliance to the national regulatory authorities in the country, which has also some roles and responsibility that we recognize in our QA policies. The recognition of stringent mechanism, it can be what we call the stringent regulatory authorities. It can be also pre-qualification mechanism, which is the pre-qualification project within WHO. So these are what we call stringent mechanism, which we recognize in our QA policy, depending on the product category, of course. And this is defined and clearly articulated in the different QA policy and PSM guide documentation that we provide. Next slide. What is interesting also for you to understand is that this recognition to stringent mechanism or national regulatory authorities has not been, I would say, enough. And we had to set up specific mechanism first within the Secretariat. And this is what we call the expert review panel. And you will know a little bit better later during the presentation. What is also a big difference and a big consequence of the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic is that we had to recognize in exceptional circumstances some emergency procedures which have been set up by different regulators and WHO pre-qualification. And these are the procedures that have allowed us to take benefit of the decision of regulators to fight against the COVID-19 on diagnostics products and pharmaceutical products very, I would say, quickly and in a very flexible way. And this kind of mechanism will be at later stage, we hope, included into the QA policies. Next slide. So going a little bit more in the details of the QA quality assurance requirements. Next slide. So I present already the two dimension. We have the product dimension and the life cycle dimension. And the other dimension that we use to add is the dimension regarding the disease. And this is a very maybe simple slide, but very complex in nature, where you will see that our quality assurance requirements are tailored to the different product category. They are tailored to the different life cycle of the process, as I explained, and they are tailored also to the different disease that we had to fight. This gives you a broad sense on the way the QA requirements are defined. Next slide. As you can see here, the different QA requirements are described in different documentation or different tools. Yeah? And there is a kind of hierarchy behind these different tools. We have the QA policies that have been approved by the board. We have the so-called PSM guide, Procurement and Supply Management Guide, which contain some additional guidance to the policy, some additional requirements, for example, for condoms or personal protective equipment, which have not been included in a policy because there is no currently standalone policy for this equipment or materials. And there is some interim requirements which have been, as you can see, developed to fight against the COVID-19 disease. And we think that it will be in the future our role to try to take the benefit of this experience and to translate some of this requirement into the so-called PSM guide or set up, why not, a more comprehensive policy for certain product category. And we issue from time to time some guidance document, what we call now briefing note, that help the PRs, the implementers, to satisfy the QA requirements. We are keen not to reinvent the wheel, and we take benefit of a lot of guidance developed by WHO. In case of need, we may have to develop some briefing note very specific to our QA requirement and trying to convince the other partners that this is something that should be considered at later stage because there is a need, and in the particular circumstance, I think we have developed some briefing note for pre-shipment inspection and testing of pen nets. Next slide, please. So don't want to go into the details. I think you will have to take some time to digest all these different elements. But as I explained, we have some guidance and some requirement on the clinical requirement. And in particular, we will see how we consider WHO guidance or WHO treatment guidelines or WHO recommendation for prevention against malaria. So we have quality requirements on the registration of the products. We have procurement requirements, and in particular, we make reference to the MQS. Pre-shipment testing and inspection, not always for product category, but this remains. And we have some requirements on the storage, okay, of course, pharmacovigilance and non-compliance, and some requirements for the PR to support some market surveillance activities, and on waste management. What is a little bit more specific to our work is the price quality reporting requirement, which asks PR to report procurement transaction for us to have a better visibility on what are the products, where they are procured from. Next slide. As you can see, depending on the different mechanism, we have here highlighted for you the different type of marketing authorization that we are relying on, except from National Medicine Regulatory Authority, for which the standards will differ country by country. And we have highlighted for you and put the different elements of the difference between stringent regulatory authorities, WHO pre-qualification, and our expert review panel, for which you will have also later on some flavor. Next slide. So now I'm giving the floor to my colleagues, and I remain available for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Alain, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We will now present in more detail and in a more specific way all these QA requirements and how they're integrated by the Global Fund to ensure procurement of quality assured product. Next slide, please. First of all, an efficient communication channel between the principal recipient and the quality assurance team of the Global Fund is key. And then some channels have been defined for peer to be aware of any update on the QA requirement. For this purpose, the principal recipient should nominate a QA focal point for each country. That will be the privileged point of contact for any QA-related issue with the Global Fund. Ideally, this QA focal point should have a good understanding of the health product, procurement, should have some understanding of quality assurance, quality control, and a good knowledge of our policy, QA policy and requirement. Basically, the role of this QA focal point will be in collaboration with the country team to liaise with the local actors as a national regulatory authority, national procurement center, pharmacovigilance center if existing. Secondly, to support the Global Fund quality assurance team in case there would be any investigation open, complaint to handle, and in case there would be recall, to support also the management of this recall. And last, to ensure that there is a report mechanism for, in the opposite way, to report any non-compliance, out of specification, adverse event to the quality assurance team of the Global Fund. Next slide, please. We start now with a very important part of the training and what implementer of AIDS, TB, malaria program who intend to use the Global Fund grants to procure health product must comply with for each category of product. Next slide, please. Then the principal recipient are authorized to procure only eligible health product with the Global Fund funding. Then here, it's good to remind what mean eligible for the Global Fund. There are health products which meet the criteria which are set up in Global Fund QA documentation. That could be either QA policies, interim guidance, or procurement and supply management guide. You will also hear the terminology core products. These are health products that require some additional, let's say, requirements. Basically for pharmaceutical, that would be antiretroviral, anti-TB, anti-tuberculosis pharmaceutical, anti-malarial pharmaceuticals. For diagnostic, HIV rapid diagnostic test, malaria rapid diagnostic test, TB diagnostic test, CD4 and viral load test. And for vector control, the insecticide treated bed net and the indoor residual spray. How you will know as a peer QA focal point what product is eligible, because there is quite a lot of change. Then we are publishing on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, we are updating list of eligible health product. Some product may be added, and then there will be some justification in the document, or we also have situation where some product will be withdrawn. In this case, if it's for quality reasons, we will issue quality assurance notice that will be shared either publicly or with impacted countries. Next slide, please. Let's go in a bit more detail now, and we start with the category of pharmaceutical products. For pharmaceutical products in general, then there is a quality assurance policy that will provide you all the information on what you could consider as an eligible pharmaceutical product. First of all, they should comply with the clinical requirement, which are that the medicine should be listed in current national institutional treatment guideline or WHO guidelines. If it's not listed in one of these two, national or international, there should be justification provided by the peer. Second big part of requirement is registration and quality assurance requirement. And it will be valid for most of the health product. The product should be authorized by the national regulatory authority of the country where the product will be used. And for this core product, they should be either approved by stringent regulatory authority or WHO pre-qualify or have received positive outcome from the expert review panel. In addition, there could be only for pharma for the ERP product, some pre-shipment testing required. I just would like to maybe give some precision on what we consider as stringent regulatory authority for pharmaceutical, because that may be different for diagnostic. Then the SRA are member, observer, associates of the International Conference of Harmonization before 2015, meaning basically EU member, US FDA, Japan, Swissmedic, Canada, and then Australia, Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein. And we are also recognizing for products which are not to be which have to be marketed outside ICH, the Article 50, the product approved through Article 50, that got positive outcome from Article 58 from EU, the Bill C9 from Canada, and any UN US FDA tentative approved product. For COVID-19 pharmaceutical product, we published some interim guidance. Basically, it's the same criteria, except that, as Alain mentioned earlier, we also recognize approval under the emergency use listing of WHO and any other emergency procedure set up by the stringent regulatory authorities. Next slide, please. For diagnostic, the Global Fund we can only be used to procure diagnostic that will meet at minimum the following standard. Then for in vitro diagnostic and imaging equipment, the manufacturing site should be compliant with the requirement of the ISO 13485 or any quality management system which is recognized by a regulatory authority from the funding member of GHTF. And for any other diagnostic like microscope, compliance with ISO 19 is required. In addition to this basic principle, for what is called in this slide critical IVD, like IVD for HIV, TB, malaria, hepatitis B, C, syphilis, co-infection, as well as some IVD that are very important for the treatment of the patient, like the J6TP. The additional requirements are, first of all, to comply with national law, and the diagnostic should be either WHO pre-qualified or for TB product recommended by WHO Global TB Program or approved by SRA, knowing SRA has to be understood as the funding member of GHTF, which are EU member, UK, Japan, USA, Australia, and Canada. And there is also a mechanism of the Global Fund expert review panel. And then any positive outcome from this ERP is also considered as eligibility criteria for this key diagnostic. For some of the ERP approved, like pharmaceuticals, some pre-shipment testing may require. I will not detail all the rest. You have to refer, as for pharmaceuticals, there is a specific quality assurance policy for diagnostic, and you have to refer to this document for further details. We can move to next slide, please. As also Alain mentioned, there are many other documents, not necessarily QA policy, but like PSM guides, interim guidance, briefing note that have been developed to describe the criteria that apply for other commodity, other health product, like for vector control. The same, we have the clinical requirements, then the vector control product should comply with national policy and or align with WHO guidance. For quality and registration, then should comply with national law. And there is also for quality a list of WHO pre-qualified vector control products. And there is possibility in the future, if required, to also use the ERP mechanism to have some vector control eligible for procurement. We'll detail this in the next slide, but for all vector control, the pre-shipment inspection and sampling are mandatory. For male and female condoms, there are a big role of the UNFPA, this UN agency. Then the male and female condom should comply with the specification defined in the WHO UNFPA guidelines, should comply with national law again. Most of our condom, most of the condom we are procuring are through UNFPA pre-qualification. Then we are relying on UNFPA. Otherwise, there is also a set of different recommendations to make sure that the products are eligible. And you can read the slide and also refer to the PSM guide, which is very clear on that. Other medical device, we'll not go into details. You know that medical device are grouped in different classes according to the risk of this medical device. And according to the risk, you will have a different level of quality requirement applying. Then for the more risky one, C and D, we will require approval by SRA, WHO pre-qualification, and there is also possibility to use the expert review panel. And for COVID-19, I guess there is also a possibility to refer to the WHO emergency use listing and then other emergency procedure from SRA. Core PPE, then like apron, gloves, mask, respirator, protecting goggles. SAM, compliance with guideline of WHO, compliance with national law, and then we require approval from SRA, WHO pre-qualification, and possibly use of the ERP. Next slide. Okay, the expert review panel, we introduce it and we mention it in this QA requirement. Then first of all, what is the purpose of the expert review panel? This is to solve supply bottleneck in case there is 2 products or less than 2 products that are either SRA approved or WHO pre-qualified. And then in this case, there is a panel of experts, which is hosted by WHO, who will assess a dossier that will be submitted by manufacturer and to evaluate the risk benefit for product, then once again, which are neither WHO pre-qualified nor approved by SRA. This is briefly how it works, just for your general knowledge. But then we are publishing regularly some call of expression of interest twice a year, and there are also ad hoc expression of interest. And the list of products included in this expression of interest are discussed extensively with internal and external stakeholders. Then there are some very clear eligibility criteria described in this expression of interest. Then the product should be manufactured in a GMP compliance manufacturing site, and the dossier should have already been submitted either to WHO PQ or to any stringent regulatory authority. Then the manufacturer will submit their dossier, the ERP will assess the dossier, and then we'll recommend, we will recommend category 1 and 2, meaning if the product is category 1 and 2, the product is eligible for procurement. And this is a time-limited recommendation valid for 12 months. And then all these products which receive positive or outcome from ERP will be listed in the health product eligibility list that we are sharing with you on a quarterly basis. Next slide, please. This is, I guess, the most important thing for you to know is how to procure ERP products, because there are some specific requirements compared to WHO pre-qualified product or SRA approved. The principal recipient has to notify to the country team, HPM, and also fund portfolio manager their wish to procure ERP product. From them, the request will be sent to QA, and then we will issue a non-objection letter. And based on that, the procurement can be organized. Sampling will be for pharmaceutical will be also organized by the Secretariat. And based on the result of the sampling, QA will communicate to the country team the outcome of the testing and the green light for shipping the goods. Then once again, this non-objection letter is valid for 12 months. The purchase order should be issued during the validity of the non-objection letter. And there is also possibility to organize parallel shipment to save some time in case there is some delay for getting the QC result. Yeah, we can go ahead with the next slide. Some example here of, let's say, success story of the ERP mechanism, the outcome of the ERP mechanism on diagnostic, on medicine. And maybe I would give the example of the TB preventive treatment for which, and between 2019 and 2022, there was only one source available for procurement. This was the rifampicin isoniazid from one of the manufacturers, and that was based on the ERP outcome. And during 2 years, this was the only way to access this very important combination for TB prevention was approval through the ERP. And then more than 2 million beneficiaries were able to access this combination thanks to the ERP mechanism. It is now, the product is now WHO qualified. Next slide. Then in addition to all these specific requirements for category of product, all the products, health product, diagnostic, pharmaceutical, vector control, and all the rest, the procurement of this product should comply with the WHO model quality assurance system for procurement agencies, as named as MQAS. This MQAS describe how the requirement for a quality management system of a procurement agency. Procurement agency could be the National Procurement Agency, a UN procurement agency, but also the procurement service agents, and then they should comply with this MQAS. There are different modules, the main one being the pre-qualification of the product, the purchase, the storage, and the distribution. And the principal recipients should ensure that the procurement agent are able to demonstrate that they are compliant with this MQAS. Next slide. On top of all of this, as already mentioned, there are also some pre-shipment sampling and testing required for some categories of products. Next slide, please. To summarize, for pharmaceutical product, only the product which receive positive outcome from ERP will be the subject of pre-shipment QC testing. The rest, pre-shipment QC testing is not mandatory. For diagnostic product, some of the ERP products, not all of them. For condom and PPE, there are pre-shipment testing required. Medical device, none. And for vector control, as mentioned already earlier, it's a systematic pre-shipment inspection and QC testing. One important note here is that the principal recipient, when responsible for the pre-shipment inspection and testing, should share the results with the Global Fund QA, with the Global Fund in general, through the PQR. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is, explain in more details how this pre-shipment inspection and control is operationalized, I would say, and who is responsible. And basically, the responsibility is on the principal recipient or on the procurement service agent, except for pharmaceutical product, where the responsibility is under the Global Fund Secretariat. This QC testing is at the pre-shipment stage. The batches could be systematic for the first batches and then random after systematic testing. And then the laboratory that is eligible, is authorized to do this testing should comply with some international rules that are detailed in this table and in the corresponding QA documentation. You have all the reference where you can find more details at the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. Last but not least, and very important, because if you don't comply with a good storage and distribution practice, all the effort you have done on the qualification of the product will be lost. The next slide. Then for all else products, the principal recipient shall comply with WHO good storage and distribution practice at all the stage of the supply chain. Meaning, and it's well explained in the procurement and supply management guide, that the PR should ensure that each of its contractor, agent, sub-recipient will comply with these GSDP practices. Mainly, this is to check if the storage structure is authorized by the authority of the country. Also very important that the storage conditions are in compliance with the recommendation of the manufacturer and many other details that are described in the guidelines. Then the best practice would be for the principal recipient to organize some independent audit, selecting any QA service agent in a proper way. With that, I think I'm finished, and I will hand over to Stephen Kimatu for the rest and the end of the presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alain, and also thank you, Sandrine, for the previous sessions. My name is Stephen Kimatu. I'm the QA specialist, vector control products within the QA team. So in the next about 5 topics, I'll be taking you until the end of the presentation, starting with market surveillance and also quality control. So market surveillance is basically those activities which are usually undertaken by the regulatory authorities within countries to ensure that the products in the markets comply to the quality standards and also meet the applicable laws and regulations. As PRs, we are expected to coordinate together with the national regulatory authority to monitor the quality of products which are procured through the Global Fund resources. Once you look at the various QA documents or guidelines, so you look at the policies, you look at the PSM, the interim guidance documents, and also the briefing documents require quality monitoring. So in this case, for pharmaceuticals, we require quality monitoring. That's a product when they're in the supply chain, and this is the responsible of the PR. And as I said earlier, this has to be coordinated with the National Regulatory Authority. Also, diagnostic products, condoms and PPEs, the medical devices, especially COVID-19 medical devices, and also vector control products, which basically covers the high TNs and IRS. Some of the ERP-reviewed products, as communicated earlier, may also require some additional risk mitigation measures to be implemented in addition to the quality monitoring. Next slide. So in order to make sure that you have a good plan for post-marketing surveillance and also quality control, PRs need to ensure that they work with the regulatory authorities and want to design a plan or a protocol for carrying out post-marketing surveillance, not just for the programs alone to go out and carry out post-marketing surveillance. This should be a concerted effort between the national regulatory authorities and all the relevant actors and stakeholders. This may involve, having a one whole team within the country, whereby all the stakeholders, all the disease programs can do this exercise as one unit. Of course, resources is something that you need to consider when you're coming up with a post-marketing surveillance plan, and therefore you need to apply risk-based approaches when you're doing the product selection as well as for verification activities. In terms of product selection, you'll need to target products which are more susceptible to poor quality. So in this case, you need to look at, like, for example, products which have stability issue, products which are more prone to, counterfeiting or even issues of GMP compliance. And when we look at the verification activities, not all the samples collected should be handed over to the QC lab. That's at the ISO or the accredited laboratory. You need to sort of have three approaches whereby, like, for example, you start with the physical or visual inspection of the products that you have collected. And this can give you some information which you can suspect probably a poor quality product by, for example, looking at the labeling, you're looking at the badge and all the regulatory information, whether it appears there. Second, you can probably do some field screening by using some screening technologies which exist, and we have several of them. Some of them are spectroscopic technologies by use of Raman near infrared, but we also have the MinLab, which basically uses a thin layer chromatography, which can be able to identify the ingredient. Of course, you need to strategize the verification activities, which are basically said. So you need to start with visual inspection, and then you can go to the next level of where you are using screening technologies. And then lastly is where you do the Combidio. By using this three-level approach, you reduce the number of samples which end up in the QC lab. And of course, that reduces the cost of QC analysis. Of course, any reports and findings during post-marketing surveillance needs to be communicated to the NRA, and the expectation is NRA to be part of the team. Of course, the cost of conducting quality control activities, this can be budgeted by peers in the Global Fund grant. And of course, technical assistance can be provided in cases where to strengthen post-marketing surveillance activities. One key thing I need to highlight is quality control is only to identify the non-compliance of a product, but post-market surveillance is a more broader term. Next. Yeah. So basically, for you to carry out a post-market surveillance or monitoring activities, you need to come up with a good sampling and testing program, which involves all the stakeholders. If you're going to do selection of the products, you can either do with the National Regulatory Authority, and that's not possible. You can contract an independent agent. Key is to select and contract the quality control lab. Please remember that, as indicated by Sandrine, this quality control lab needs to meet the requirements for GLP or ISO certification. Products, these ones need to be sampled during in-country. So in-country supply chains. If samples have to be transported within or outside the country, please make sure that you also address the importation requirements for the receiving country where the samples are being sent. And of course, if there's any need for method transfer for some of the products, that's basically undertaken. Upon receiving the results and there are any out of specifications or any non-compliance, this needs to be handled with the NRA, but also these results need to be communicated to the Global Fund QA team. Any results that will help in having guidance from the Global Fund QA team on how to proceed. Of course, all the records and documentations for quality monitoring, this needs to be kept. And as per the Global Fund requirements, at least this documentation need to be kept for at least 7 years. And so any non-compliance, I've already indicated, need to be communicated to the National Regulatory Authority and also through the Global Fund. This is through the country team. We are coming up with various forms which can be used to report out of specification and non-compliance and also adverse drug reactions. And so this will be made available. They are currently undergoing some internal review and they will be published on our website. Next. So let's look at vigilance and also non-compliance. We start with the pharmacovigilance. And of course, when we talk of pharmacovigilance, we're basically looking at the science and the process of monitoring the safety of the products when they are within the market. Next slide. So PRs are basically strongly encouraged to support the NRA in order to ensure that you monitor the adverse drug reactions. And these are basically communicated to the National Regulatory Authority. We have a timeline on when to report these ADRs, so within 5 working days, preferably using the standard format. So some of the countries already have established pharmacovigilance systems, and therefore they have a specific, document to do the reporting. Also, you need, if the same reporting needs to be reported to the Global Fund, and if we require any assistance in terms of investigations and also to implement those decisions or advice, we require the PRs to support the Global Fund QA team. Of course, if there are any regular updates that you have received, then the PR or the PSA on the investigation by the National Regulatory Authority, this one also needs to be shared with the Global Fund. Next slide. So, as indicated, regulatory authorities need to have a national pharmacovigilance center, which is basically functioning. So at least they need to have a designated staff, one full-time, some form of funding for carrying out post-marketing surveillance activities. They need to have a clear mandate, and this probably needs to be anchored in the law, well-defined structures and the roles, and also needs to be collaborating with the WHO Program for International Drug Monitoring, which is basically in Uppsala. Then they also need to have an existence of a national spontaneous reporting system. This is the most commonly used reporting system for ADR, and you can use the ADR reporting form, which are made available by the regulatory authority. They also need to establish a national database of all the ADRs reported and also how the ADR reports have been managed. Of course, the National Pharmacovigilance Center needs to have a pharmacovigilance advisory committee or an expert panel. And this is basically to provide technical assistance in terms of looking at the causality assessment, what's the cause and the effect, and also doing risk assessment in terms of the NDRs reported. And lastly, there need to be a clear communication strategy for routine communication and crisis communication to healthcare workers. So if it's a serious NTR and needs to be reported to the public, then this information needs to come out clearly on how that is communicated. One key important thing I need to highlight is that the Global Fund financing can be used to support national regulatory authorities to strengthen their pharmacovigilance activities. In this case, there must be a link with the disease program or as a part of the RSSH grant. Next. So when it comes to handling of non-compliance and out of specifications, PRs are encouraged to support the Global Fund Secretariat to deal with any non-compliance or any out of specification results which have arisen from, when you are doing the quality monitoring or the post-marketing surveillance. So you need to provide adequate information, and we shall see in the next slide what that adequate information needs to have. If you are carrying out any investigation, then Global Fund requires more information to carry out an investigation. You need to share that information. What activities have you performed so far at country level? So let's say, for example, you have gotten out of specification. You need to know whether you have quarantined the product and what other measures you have put in place. And then, of course, if there are other internal and external partners who have been engaged, you need to make them aware. Non-compliances or out of specification, this need to be reported by the PR, and where in case there are PSA who is doing the procurement, this needs also to be reported within 5 working days. And as I said earlier, we'll come up with a standardized format of forms, which are basically specific to each product category that will be used. Of course, this also need to be reported to the National Regulatory Authority. And then if there is any requirement for us to do or carry out investigation, we require the PRs to support us in those investigations. And of course, any regular updates, if we are carrying out the investigations by the PR or the PSA, then this need to be also communicated to the Global Fund QA team. Next. One of the things I need to highlight just in the previous slide is that there are cases whereby you may have a non-compliant product and there's the need for the product in the country. And therefore, in order to avoid any shortages, we have what we call the Health Products Risk Committee, which PRs can make an application to, and for that committee to allow a non-compliant product to be able to, ship into a country. So I just wanted to highlight that we have that mechanism. In terms of the reporting, what did we require or what is supposed to be reported or the information that needs to be there? One is about the title. So we need to, within the form, tell us which product category this is, because I said the forms will be specific for each category. Origin of the report, we want to know who is reporting the non-compliance, the out of specification, or the ADR. The product detail, we need more information about the product. So what product is involved, the name, the batches, and also if, like, for example, this product has already been distributed, we need to know how many do you have in stock and how many have been used. What is the nature of the defect? So we need to know if it's an out of specification result, if you are reporting an ADR, or it's background information are basically of the nature of the defect that you are reporting. And of course, the action taken or proposed. So preliminary action, this should be to protect the patient. So the key thing, if it's an out of specification or non-compliance, quarantine the product, and then now start the investigation and engage all the required partners, including the manufacturers, especially for the out of specifications or non-compliance. And of course, any annexes that you need or supporting information that needs to also be part of the documentation that you need to have, like, for example, certificate of analysis. And then the privacy statement, we do record that some of the data that you are sharing, that you Global Fund can use, also publish that information. Next slide. The other component is about healthcare waste management. We get these products, and of course, we always have some damaged products, or we have expiries, and therefore there's need on how to manage healthcare wastes. Next slide. So as a general requirement, and there are various documents in the reference section on how to handle healthcare waste, specifically pharmaceuticals and other products. Recipients, you need to ensure that they safe disposal of unused pharmaceuticals or expired or damaged and healthcare products. The key thing here is you need to comply to the national regulations, and this most likely is by the NRA, and also any environmental laws that exist in the country. And this is basically to ensure that you minimize the risk to the public health. So if the NRA has specific requirements, then you need to meet those requirements. Specific for medical lab, recipients need to ensure labs comply also to the applicable laws and the requirements in terms of management of healthcare waste. Of course, there are some biohazards products, and therefore you need to make sure that you comply to that. Of course, critical and evidence that you have comprehensively and also ensured that you comply to the regulation is documentation to ensure that you have safe disposal of the products. So you need to have either a destruction certificate or a disposal certificate, whatever document is issued by the authorities. Next. I think some Alan or Sandrine mentioned that one of the requirements is also price and quality reporting. Next slide. So the Global Fund has an online publicly available database where all procurement transactions which are undertaken using Global Fund resources are usually available. And so this is a requirement for the PRs to report and also the PSAs. So in terms of what products need to be reported, we have a good guide. That's a quick guide to the PQR reporting to these products. So the key thing here to know is that if the procurement is done outside the PPM, it's the responsibility of the PR to do the PQR reporting. If it's procurement is through the PPM, then the PSA usually does the PQR reporting. So in terms of what you're supposed to report, pharmaceutical products, all the core products need to be reported, and Sandrine covered that. You also need to report hepatitis C pharmaceuticals. Essential medicines, these ones don't need to be reported. For diagnostic products, yes, also need to be reported, and we have special IVDs, which basically it's the high-risk IVDs for HIV, TB, malaria, hepatitis B, C, and syphilis, and some others. Lab equipment for diagnostic purposes, also that needs to be reported. These are the lab equipments for HIV, hepatitis, TB, and malaria testing. Condoms and PPEs also need to be reported. Yes, condoms and also surgical, non-surgical, and respirators. Also, this needs to be reported. Then some medical devices under COVID, so class C and also class D. And for vector control products, all need to be reported for all the ITNs and for IRS. Next slide. Okay. So this basically shows, those who have not come across the PQR reporting system. That's a slide of how our PQR reporting system. As I said earlier, we have a good guide on how the PQR reporting needs to be undertaken. So to be specific, what needs to be reported is about the products, who are the suppliers, the procurement transactions. So most likely they will have a commercial invoice, which is required, and then certificate of analysis and the tested products. So just to make it more clear is for all the products, you need to have uploaded the invoice. Then specifically for ITN and IRS products, you need to upload the supplier certificate of analysis, the inspection reports, and the test reports. And specifically for ERP products, in addition to the invoice, you also need to upload the no objection letter, which has been issued by QA. So all ERP products, pharmaceuticals, or diagnostics. So how do we use the information that has been reported? One, we verify compliance to eligibility requirements. I think Sandrine covered what is an eligible product. So we want to verify the products which have been procured are eligible for procurement. We also verify the manufacturing sites for some of where these products have been manufactured, whether it's the manufacturing sites which are approved. And of course, in case of any non-compliance issues, we can be able to do traceability of some of these products. Next slide. So LFAs, they have a role when it comes to the PQR reporting, and this is basically to verify the PQR data that has been input by the PR or by the PSAs. So as LFA, we need to look at the completeness of the information which has been uploaded or reported by the PR or by the PSA. Critical is to make sure that the products which has been reported, there's also what is in the invoice, the type of the product. Sometimes we are put whereby you find the supplier and the product are different. So you need to verify that. And of course, to verify the invoice is there. And for the products that I've said, IRS, ITNs, and also for ERP products, the appropriate documentation has been uploaded. This is basically to make the key step is to make sure that the data which has been reported is high quality. Sometimes we also require the LFA to do compliance verification services, and this is basically usually commissioned when in coordination with our LFA team. So some of the things we may require for verification is whether some of the risk mitigation measures proposed for ERP products have been implemented. We may also want to verify if countries are able to handle product recalls and such. Next. So when it comes to regulatory system strengthening, next slide, please. In addition to working with the regulatory authorities, one of the key things from the QA department is to ensure that this strengthening of the national regulatory systems within the country. And therefore, this is to be budgeted when you are doing the grants for the countries. In order to make sure that the systems which need to be strengthened, they need to have evidence-based, and the way objective assessment is using the WHO global marking tool, which is usually used to assess the NRS. You also need to have a country buy-in and also partnership engagement. And then, of course, needs to be strategic in the intervention that you're proposing for in terms of strengthening. And of course, it has to be linked to the Global Fund intervention that's, geared towards the 3 diseases or as part of the RSSH. Next slide. So this slide basically shows the areas where, the national regulatory system can be strengthened. I will not enter to more of the details. We have a technical brief note on supporting the effective regulatory system, but basically we're looking at leadership and governance, the structure of the regulatory system, their quality management system, the HR, and also their information management system. Next slide. So we have some useful references in terms of where you can be able to get some of this information. We have our Global Fund QA website. Please visit the website. Most of the information we have gone through is basically available here. And then lastly, is also the list of the references that we have also been able to make reference when we are doing the presentation. I think with that, I will hand over the session for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for this presentation. So we will now move to the Q&A. I see that we already have several questions in the chat. Before ending the floor to Alain for the Q&A, please know that we will also share a short anonymous survey in the chat before closing. We would appreciate if you could take a minute to provide feedback on this session. So with no further ado, over to you, Alain, for the Q&A. Thanks.
I'm currently also checking if one of my colleagues are ready to answer to some question. I think we don't have so many, so probably we can try to close this question. We are missing information flow between the service delivery back to the procurement agent. It is also wise if a national value is established between the service delivery point back to the NRA of the country. I think here in the question, I don't think if it is a question or a comment, because I think it's a matter of the way the country pharmacovigilance system is organized. And just 2 points on this. I think we are keen to, and the country team, HPM, are keen to support pharmacovigilance system in countries in order to bridge any gaps. And from our end, the QA team has set up forms and standards that can help to report back to us. However, I think we are keen to maintain the roles and to support the roles and responsibility. It is primarily the roles of the national regulatory authority to deal with any safety issue for medicine. So yes, happy to support the country through grant funds. We, from our side, are keen to collect whatever signal information in order to forward this to the stringent regulators, if any, or to the suppliers. And this is our role. We are not technically assessing the signals. We may, from time to time, decide some kind of risk mitigation strategy. The question 2, I think, Manusika, you are ready to answer? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Alan. I think 2, 3, and 4 are sort of related, so I'll take that all together. So about contacting the Global Fund QA team for QA issues, I think it was on one of the slides, there is a generic email that you can use to report quality issues, but you should always put your country team HPM specialist in copy so that we can liaise further with the QA team and of course also with you for follow-up questions. I think maybe Alan has already mentioned the QA team is quite big now and they do have dedicated QA specialists for different product categories. And the same goes for number 3 as well, whether it's the PR or LFA, please always keep your country team HPM specialist in copy when you are reporting any quality issues or have questions. Regarding 3, the PR QA focal person, this is not a new requirement. It is already mentioned in the Global Fund Procurement and Supply Chain Management Guide, the PSM guide. What we did last year is sort of look at this and expand or clarify the roles and responsibilities of this person so that it is easier for the PRs to actually identify a person within their team who can act as a QA focal person. And the reason we did this is when we were looking at the communication processes between the Global Fund Secretariat and the PR, especially regarding QA policies and updates and guidances, which is a lot, we thought it might not be reaching the right audience or the person within the PR team. So one of the ways we try to address this is to make sure that we have contacts of all the PR focal persons. We created a distribution list, and since September 2022, the QA team also sends update directly to this distribution list and to ensure that the right person within the PR team receives this communication on QA updates. Having said that, this is a work in progress. I think till date, we have just over 100 grants and not countries, grants where we have identified PR focal persons, and then we are continually working to update this list. And where we don't have a focal person, the HPM specialist continues to communicate this to the PRs. So thank you, and over.
On the question 4, is there anybody who can give some figures on the number of the QA focal point? How many countries have?
Yes, Alan, I think I just mentioned just over 100 grants, not countries, okay, but grants because a country can have multiple grants and different PRs. Thank you.
Okay, I can take probably the question on 5 on the IVDs. What is the guidance for self-certified IVDs that belong to the core product category of Global Fund, especially when the EU decides to extend the transition period for various class of IVDs? I'm not sure that this is indeed possible because our core product category, or HIV, TB, and malaria, request high stringent mechanism and registration by stringent regulatory mechanism, such as SGHTF member, pre-qualification, or the ERP. And I cannot, and I don't know how to identify any products that should be self-certified. If it is self-certified in certain jurisdiction, it will not be eligible. And we are working to update our QA policy regarding the change of the different regulation in the world, and in particular in EU. But I don't think that this is a question that will remain in the future. If you can send the list of another slide. I think Mohamed, do you still want to come back on this question 6, no?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So there is a question on how has the Global Fund strategized its approach to engage national regulators in implementing quality checks on procured products. This could potentially involve senior level participation or securing commitments from respective countries. So I see two components to answer this question. One is country facing. Another one is maybe how we deal with that as a Global Fund from a corporate standpoint, and also working with other technical partners who could help with that collaboration at the NRA level. So I'm going to speak on the local or the country-facing side, and maybe Alan, you could shed some light and give a perspective on how we deal with that through the strategic initiative funding and also through collaboration with partners. So the first thing is that there are requirements at the country level, at the PR level, when it comes to implementing or working on quality assurance and quality control activities in collaboration with the NRAs. And these are documented clearly in the PSM guide in its version in June 2021, which is the latest version published on our website. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's section 4.5 on quality monitoring activities. And these requirements include that the PRs have to work with NRAs, with national regulators, to develop sampling, random sampling of finished pharmaceutical products, and to collect those samples, send them to laboratories that are meeting specific criteria, i.e. the ISO 17025 and the WHO pre-qualification, share the results of these tests with the Global Fund, and in case of non-conformities, to take action within 5 working days. And all of these are actually requiring close collaboration and work with the NRAs. And the country teams, speaking of how we can engage NRAs within the Global Fund partnership model, because they are in many instances tend to be not engaged. We encourage the PRs actually to invite them to be part of the country coordinating mechanism, to be part of discussions during the preparation of the grant or the reprogrammings. And we encourage that they participate in the sampling exercise. And obviously, if the national laboratory falls under their purview that conducts these tests, that they are doing the tests in the national lab. And obviously, any regulatory decision related to recall or related to action towards non-conformities, they are the ones who are engaged and leading on this. So these are some of the examples, and all of this is being checked if a new PR is selected at the capacity assessment stage. So all these requirements actually are there, are present, and are being implemented and enforced. with the NRAs particularly, they are taking more role, I would say, with the increased focus on quality assurance, quality control, and obviously now within the Global Fund, we have a bigger team with more specialists, more focal points, and that helps us a lot at the country team level to provide guidance, to provide technical advice, and to guide the PRs on how to engage with the NRAs, and also to engage directly with the NRAs sometimes. So this is on the country-facing side, and at the corporate side, Alain, do you want to give some perspective on this?
No, I prefer to go to other question than
Okay.
I think you have provided already a lot of information.
Sure.
The next one on the market authorization, do you want to take it quickly, or I think it is maybe country situation as you want?
Yeah, sure. So majority of So then, in a nutshell, there are incentives to encourage manufacturers to actually register their products in big markets or markets where we are seeing a lot of impact in terms of the fight against the diseases. So, for example, in malaria in Africa, that's where most of the burden is. When we are doing our framework agreements with the suppliers, there are within the technical evaluation criteria that we look at, there are incentives that a manufacturer is registered or having their products manufactured in these markets, in African countries, for example. So the bottom line here is that there is not really a way that the Global Fund itself can ask manufacturers to or to enforce that the product is registered in one country. This is a completely independent decision by the manufacturer, by the supplier. It has different aspects, including commercial aspects, including cost aspects. Obviously, registering a product in a market comes with a cost, comes with a lot of effort. And so complying with this would have to have a return. And so on our side, we present some incentives, as I mentioned, and I gave the example on malaria. In some instances, that could be a bilateral conversation also between the supplier or the manufacturer and the country team, explaining to them that orders will only be possible in this particular market if you register the product, and giving them the volumes, the demand data, they actually comply with that and go ahead and register the product. So possible to do, but it's on voluntary basis with some incentives from our side. Over.
Okay, thanks, Mohamed. I think on the question 8, how the Global Fund incorporates and strengthens its policy regarding independent post-delivery quality inspection by countries. I think there is also another question on the post-delivery inspection, and we can answer to both at the same time. And this is probably linked also with the answer provided by Sandrine on the point 9. But regarding post-delivery, I think what is important is and it is related to good storage and good distribution practice, is that the receiving entity will have to check the reality, the presentation, the identification, traceability of the products to ensure that they are the one that have been envisaged for procurement. And I think this is something that is important. After, there is a question on the need to test at post-delivery stage. This is not something that we support. It is something that we support in the case that during the delivery, there is an incident. There is a signal that nothing has been really done properly, and then we can investigate. But on the day-to-day and current practice, we don't support post-delivery inspection and testing. Up to Sandrine on the question 9. Mike?
Sorry, I was on mute. The question is requiring some explanation distinguishing quality assurance and quality control, which is a higher priority, and what about shipment? Cannot read it, and what to do in case of product failure. Yeah, quality assurance is quite well defined. This is very systematic measure that has to be implemented to ensure that the product is compliant with the specification which were registered. And then this is really systematic and anticipated measure. This is a very broad process, and this is applied to all the cycle of the product, from development, production, also release of the product, and also along all the supply chain. Like we mentioned, compliance with good distribution practice, which is purely QA. Then the quality control is really an additional check, because I mean, you may have quality control, but if you don't do quality assurance, you will have a lot of waste. I mean, you may have failure to your quality control, high level of failure. Then it's really the last check. And as Alain mentioned, we will recommend to do QC testing only on a risks-based approach, because normally if the manufacturer has followed all the rules, if the principal recipient, distributor, etc., follow all the rules during the supply chain, there should not be QC failure. Then it should be very, what we recommended, implemented based on risk assessment.
Okay, Sandrine, I think we will have to close the session. Just to say that probably, I think we will try to answer in the future session and to the other question, and we probably might also update the training needs depending on the answer that we provide. I think we have to leave and to give the floor to the organizer in order to close in due time. Sorry, Sandrine.
No, I finished.
So we are now reaching the end of the session. We would like to thank very much the presenters and all the participants for joining us today, as well as the interpreters. As mentioned, we will have another session next week. We will share a reminder regarding this session, and we will also make the presentations and the recording available shortly on our info session webpage on the Global Fund website. And we will make sure the unanswered questions are addressed and shared with you. Thank you.